Peter Jennings, the anchor of World News Tonight here on ABC. Good to see you. Welcome back. Can I
Maria's not only the youngest member of the audience, she's also the best looking.
Yeah. Isn't she cute?
May we share those oranges?
You have a little one named Elizabeth. Are you fond of little girls?
I'm not quite sure I like the way you framed the question.
Excuse me.
I have a weakness for... how old are you, Marie?
5.
My Elizabeth is 6, so yeah, I have a weakness for women your age. That's
yeah, you do. I know you do. Boy, you start early and you work long hours, and I wonder if people realize it isn't just running into makeup and then presenting the news. It's a long day for you. You started this morning speaking at the Westin Hotel at 7:30.
I did, but I must tell you, I cannot think of a morning in a very long time when it has been worth getting up so early, because at the risk of sounding like I'm schmoozing you, you have the most beautiful sunrise I have ever seen in the country. I don't know what it has to do with the weather at this time of year or not, but looking at the Westin Hotel at the sunrise this morning was unbelievable. And if the Patriots are half as good
as the sunrise
and do better than you did with the orange, then you're in terrific shape. Yeah, you work a long day.
You do. Give us a sense of your day. What time do you get up and what time do you go to bed?
Well, I mean, I get up when my 2 young children do, which is anywhere between 4 and 7, depending on their frame of mind. The first thing I do in the morning is listen to, because I have a shortwave radio in the window of my apartment in New York, and I listen to the overseas broadcasts. I listen to Radio Moscow, and I listen to the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, and other things I can get, like Radio Australia and Radio Peking, and sometimes the Voice of America coming back, because that gives me a better perspective on the way the other part of the world is going, because it's 6, 7, and in the case of the Soviet Union, 8 hours ahead of us. So by the time I get into the office an hour and a half or so later, I have a sense of the way that the rest of the world is thinking. And then we go, with exceptions like today, or exceptions like working out of the studio, out of the office on a story, or traveling on assignment. You work pretty much flat out from early morning until 7:30 at night, when you heave this incredible sigh of relief and say, well, did we do it better than the enemy? And did the audience get a full sense of what was going on in the world today? And then you flee.
2 points in what you just said. The idea of you're working a long day, is that just because there are assignments for you, as you just mentioned, or because you actually are in great part responsible for the structure of the cast?
Oh, well, both. I mean, I think reporters, which I have now been, I think, for 27 years, 28 years maybe, become accustomed to just staying with it round the clock, and which is very difficult, by the way, if you ever want to stop being a reporter and lead a normal life, and you hear the bell ring for some crisis somewhere in the world and you're not going. It's very tough on people who retire. The wonderful thing about journalism is that it is different every day in some dimension. There is a different dimension of every dimension, so it never gets really boring. And the second part of your question, yes, I mean, the executive producer of the program and I must have the program look like something by the early evening, with pieces of reporting from all around the world and pieces of reporting we do in the house. So yes, you're writing the broadcast, shaping the broadcast. You may be on a totally separate assignment. You may be working on a series. Yeah, I mean, it's never boring. It sounds awfully self-important, but I mean, it's never...
Well, you have, the last time you and I were together, we were with Kati Marton, your wife, and you have a real sense of honesty in terms of your answers, and it isn't often I think you find that. So I'll ask you a question that requires a bit of honesty. The sense of competition is enormous between the networks, and I would think that the egos run very high, and I would think as you sit down with an executive producer, you must hold your ego in some kind of tow in terms of decision-making. How do you get to a point where you don't become so heady because of the importance of your job, that you make very realistic decisions?
I just tell the executive producer to keep his ego in check, and we get along fine.
There must be tense moments in that.
Oh, sure there are. But I mean, again, television is a very collective business, as you know, and as the audience will experience today when they see everybody doing all the jobs for which you're getting the credit.
Well, that's very true. There are a lot of people that go to putting a thing together.
And so I mean, I have a lot of clout, if you will, but that's primarily because I've been doing it for a long time, and I therefore have a lot of experience. So does my executive producer, but so do a lot of people on the staff have different forms of experience. The competition between us and NBC and CBS is indeed very fierce, very healthy, because it enables the American people, I think, to get reporting and news on a higher level. It also gives them a better sense of choice. But it doesn't in any way, shape, or form get into the professional in the way of the professional respect that Brokaw or Jennings, I think, respectively have for each other or for each other's news. I will tell you, which is come as no surprise to my colleagues, that if Dan or Tom and I are sitting here looking at that camera there, over there in all three of the news studios are monitors on which I am watching them and they are watching me.
And so are the executives that run the network.
Oh yeah, and the executives watch all three as well. But I mean, I think there's an interesting vibrancy about competing, like the Globe and the Herald or Post.
But does the audience ever suffer in the presentation? Because I wonder how you get to a point where you present differently a story that is the obvious lead story. Last night, the obvious lead story is still Muammar Gaddafi.
Sure.
In the interest of presenting it differently, do you often shade?
No, and that's a misunderstood point. We are not, none of us are in the business of reporting differently to get an edge.
However, you were in this case of the TWA hostage.
Now there's a different situation. The TWA Flight 847, the hostage situation in Beirut, was a situation where I believe we were all guilty of excess. Sometimes invaded the privacy of families to much too great a degree, sometimes went on the air with breathless bulletins, which we could have waited with for some period of time. And that is indeed an example of where the competition gets out of hand. In some respects, and I apologize to the audience about this, in some respects I'm glad it happens because we learn some very hard lessons from it. And when the seizure of the Achille Lauro, the Italian cruise ship, came along, we were all much more subdued, much more cautious. Not that we went on the air in the first instance with incorrect news, but there was, I think, some tendency to get on there ahead of the other guy. I think we learned a good lesson, and it's important that we learn those lessons. I'm sorry that we have to impose our lessons on you, but it's very good when the audience comes back at us, as they did. The audience, the American people, landed very heavily on us for this excessive competition in that instance, and I think we learned something. I think we became more mature as a result.
The messenger of the news becomes a very important person. I mean, I think you will agree. What makes a national anchor? Someone who is more intelligent than the local anchors, or opportunity, luck? What is it that makes you, Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, special?
I'm not sure that we are, quite frankly, that special. But we're different from local anchor people in that we have a different framework for experience. If you take Natalie and Chet, for example, who are two of the very best anchor people in America on CBB, their expertise is in Boston and the Northeast. My expertise, over quite a long period of time, hopefully my expertise,
well, yes, and this is a good time
has been gained in other areas.
Good time to remind people, Peter, you reported from all over the world for so very long before you took this seat. You really do have a sense of the world.
I mean, in a sense, that's one of the ways you get the job. Because what we do at the national level is we deal, in fact, with the Middle East, we deal with the Soviets, we deal with Europe, we deal with South Africa. And so you want somebody, hopefully, in that chair who has some familiarity and some measure of expertise, albeit small, in those areas. People on the local level like Chet. I mean, I could never walk into Boston and have anything like the handle on local politics or local culture or local mores.
Right.
You know, I'm just damn glad I don't cheer for the Dolphins.
So are we.
Can you imagine? Well, I mean, I would cheer for the Dolphins if they were playing against Washington or something.
Just one final question, though. Before we go to the audience for questions, we will continue this conversation. But it seems that news has taken on a bit of a different kind of color in that it is all right these days to present features. Almost features that we could drop into Good Day, that kind of entertainment programming. Not that far, but you know what I'm saying, and I hope the audience does too. And it's very different than what it used to be, and it's been kind of a slow-moving trend.
Well, I think this is where you will see a very distinct difference between the three evening newscasts. ABC News, World News Tonight, the broadcast that I work on, is really, I think, a much harder news broadcast. Hard from top to top. But indeed, we all do longer pieces now, and we all do more background, and we tend to do them on major national and international issues, primarily because we must. Because local stations like CVB now have this incredible technological capability to go anywhere in the world.
With Newstar.
With Newstar, the satellite business, news gathering capabilities. And so we have got to go. We've got to do the longer takeouts on AIDS. We've got to do the longer takeouts on Graham, Rudman, and budget cutting and the national deficit and international Soviet-American relations. So I think that's why you're seeing longer pieces. But I don't think you see very many soft features on World News Tonight.
You don't. Sometimes at the end of the show.
Oh, sometimes.
And it's a nice light way to
God, I
leave
don't want
us.
people to go to bed every night depressed.
Reason why you go to Geneva, Paris, Bonn, Mexico? Is
No.
that a competitive edge
No,
or be
because
closer to the news?
No, because the thing that I think people sometimes forget is that the three people who happen to anchor the nightly news broadcasts now are all reporters, not guys who suddenly walked out of a department store and got a job. But the pressure of the ratings overall is significant because we work for large commercial organizations who must finance our news divisions and who wish to be as competitive with each other in terms of circulation as two good Boston newspapers.
How much
are.
is a quarter of a rating point worth to the network
I
in
haven't
dollars?
the vaguest
But
idea.
you're talking millions of dollars.
You are indeed talking millions of dollars. Mind you, it costs millions of dollars to run a news operation.
Sure.
In which I said that I don't think either sanctions or military action are going to end terrorism in the world, that we have to get more diligently at the root causes of terrorism, which are different in various parts of the world. I think Colonel Gaddafi has won a round. I covered him for many years. I've spent a lot of time in Libya. And I am one of those who think that you, in some ways, treat better with the colonel by isolating him quietly than doing what many members of the administration have, and many members of the American public have done, sort of dare the president to go for him. I think that's unfortunate. I think if we're going to take action against men like Gaddafi, who require action taken against them in some form, we should do it more quietly.
Is it tough to be on top of the mountain? Is there a sense of peril in falling off? Because where would you go from here? Or are there other things in your life that keep you stable and
Well, I think the first thing that keeps anyone like me stable are my kids. But I mean, I think that unlike the days of Walter Cronkite, Chet Huntley, and David Brinkley in those principal jobs, that those, you know, despite the fact that we're all sort of aging rather rapidly, Tom and Dan and myself, I mean, I suspect that if I get knocked off the mountain or choose to get off the mountain, I'll simply go back to being a reporter. It's still the most honorable profession I know.